There's like so much excitement. It feels like a very joyful day. Go ahead and we'll grab our seats and get started for our fig presentation. So before we get started, I just want to thank you for being here. I think I've met a lot of you. I think I might be the only one who didn't have time to make a name tag yet. I'm Cristy Garner. I'm your current chair. And today what we're going to do is a combination of a fig presentation so we can learn more about growing figs, caring for figs. We have a wonderful panel here that I'll introduce you to. But I also am really excited because we're going to start working on how can we as a community really be able to respond to the black fig fly coming into our community, and how can we base some of what we're going to do on the research. So we're so fortunate to have here with us Wilson and Mel Thayer. They're here from UC Riverside, and so they're going to be sharing some of the research that they've been doing. And so we're just so privileged. Thank you so much for being here. And then we have our community members, Lyle Jenks and Renan Manzanero. And they're going to be talking more about what they've been doing actively in homestead growing. You know, how can we respond? And also what are other chapters doing? And so at the end, I'm going to show you one of the ways that we'll be able to start collecting information together as a community, just so we can start figuring out like what's working, what varieties are being affected, of all the strategies that we're doing, which are the ones that make the most sense, that have the most payoff. Okay, so we're going to have our presentation. We're going to go until about 4:45, and no matter how much fun we are having at that point, we're going to shut her down because Billy is cooking fish in the kitchen, and we want to eat it while it's hot. So I promised him we would be in the seats eating at 5 o'clock. So that's the tentative schedule, and then we're just here to enjoy each other's company. Okay, so to get us started, the first thing I just want to say is figs are sexy, right? Figs are amazing. As I was looking at just some of the history of figs, it was amazing how many slightly inappropriate images were available for figs. You know, we have kids in the room, so I won't talk too much about it, but it was really, figs have been known for so long. You know, they're known as an aphrodisiac. They're known as just kind of this amazing gift from the spirits, from the heavens. They've been revered for so many thousands of years, and we're so fortunate to live in a climate where we can grow this amazing fruit. So today is all about figs. And so one of the things I would love to touch on today, and also for this next year, one of my personal goals is just to start highlighting all the reasons why we grow fruit. You know, one of the things is it's wonderful to have delicious fruit, but I'm also really interested in how can we grow the most nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables? How can we grow something that's far better than anything we could find in our grocery stores? And so when we talk about figs had some incredible benefits, and I'll just highlight a few of them. I thought this image was great. This was a summary that was done in 2023 of just the medical literature on just some of the amazing compounds that are in figs. Everything from being able to increase HDLs, increase antioxidants, lower triglycerides, inflammation, and blood pressure. And again, these are all in peer-reviewed medical journals. So this is pretty impressive research. There's also figs help with insulin sensitivity. They help to keep blood sugar nice and balanced. In cognitive benefits, they've shown an increase in learning ability and a decrease in anxiety. Improved irritable bowel symptoms, so it helps with constipation. And in body weight, it also helps with helping to reduce adiposity, body mass index, and so on. So I just thought that was like a neat kind of touchstone to see all the incredible things by being utterly delicious and amazing that figs can do for ourselves and our families for our health. Okay, so we're going to get started. And what would be most comfortable? Would you like to sit or would y'all like to stand?
Maybe when I'd be happy standing. It'd be easier to like look around.
Yeah. Why don't we have you two stay comfortable, and Renan and Lyle, I'll pull you up here now. We only have one mic, so we're gonna play past the mic. So figs have an amazing structure, and so I thought this was a nice place to start as we dive in. Figs are actually not a fruit at all. So Lyle, tell us about them.
Yeah, so it's like the coolest thing if you're a plant nut where you want to find like the most rare flower, and why not find one that's inside out? So yeah, I've started looking into this because where I live, we're happy enough to be able to hybridize figs. So I got it in my head of like, wouldn't it be great to have like all these different colors, varieties, flavors. And so I'm also in the plant world, nursery world. So I know guys up in Portland who go out and collect rare plants. So I'm in that fringe world of, hey, let's make a cool new plant. And since I love figs, I figured, hey, let's make a cool new fig. So I started getting into this to hybridize new fig varieties. And you'll see the picture of Wally's Red in here later. And we originally got that because it's a great big red fig. And I had just never seen a red fig variety anywhere because you don't see very many red figs out there. So I crossed it, or I'm going to cross it with a lot of the really good table varieties. We've started out growing some panache varieties, a couple other ones like that. So the fun thing about these things is it takes that little wasp to get in there to pollinate them. So then we started going around and looking, well, do we have this wasp? And so we found out that we do have the wasp. So then we started going around and collecting male trees to do our own hybridization of trees. And we got 10 acres, so we got room to play with. Not everybody gets to have 10 acres to play with, though. So yeah, we've got pictures in here that'll show the difference between a regular fig when it's pollinated. They get really juicy and they get full. And then when you open up a male fig, you look at it and it's sort of dry and funky looking because it's full of pollen. It's just completely different looking. So you'll see some of those photos in here as we get along. Can't think of anything else, but yeah.
So that's kind of one of the cool things is that a fig is literally a flower inside out. I thought that was trippy. And so that's why when the fig wasp goes inside, which Renan is just going to kind of walk us through a little bit about how the fig wasp interacts with the fig, it literally is going inside to pollinate the flower that's inside that fig. And so that was something I just thought was, so simple. We don't think about the biology of some of these amazing fruits.
So it starts off, you have the female fig, or the female fig wasp. So it enters, well, usually they'll come out of a male Capri Fig. The females will come out, they'll go into the ostiole, or the little hole at the top. They'll go into there, and then by doing that, because they've exited a male Capri Fig, they have the pollen on like all around them. So by them going inside, they pollinate the female fig. From there, a lot of people have the misconception that they're eating the fig wasp. One, they're super tiny, and then the other thing is figs actually contain phycin. So the phycin is similar to bromelain and papain that's in papaya, where it'll actually dissolve it. So the fig wasp gets completely dissolved within the fig, and then from there you have it go on. Some of the female fig wasp will insert their eggs into other male figs, so they continue that colony.
And we'll talk a little bit about why this is so important. So when we talk about the black fig fly and what we can do to be able to offset it, this process of the fig wasp is a really important process. So that's why I wanted just to introduce it for all of us, so we're all kind of have the same foundation. So we're not going to touch on this a lot because I look around and I know we have quite a few experienced growers here, but I thought it might be nice just to take a couple minutes and talk about just fig tree basics. So if we're going to talk about, the best place to site a fig, where would be the best place you'd say to site a fig on a property?
They would love the sunniest spot you can give them, hottest place you can give them, but we've had them pop up, because we get them growing up from seed. We had one, you'll see a picture of it later with my dad standing next to it, called Accelerator. And it grew up in a place where it didn't get any full sun until 2:00 in the afternoon, and then it was blazed, and it was fine. So even if you don't have the best conditions, and it was planted there by a bird, it was growing next to a pine tree, and had very hard clay soil to grow in. And this thing did great. It got like 20 feet tall by the time we went, we got to transplant this thing. It's going to eat our deck. And our original name for it was Deck, because it was growing off of our deck.
So creative.
My dad
so inspired.
But then when we saw just how, you'll see, like, the leaves got like 2 feet across, and it was just growing insanely fast. So we went, let's call it Accelerator. So, they get really big, really fast. It's a big purple fruit. We got pictures of it. Tastes pretty good. And I'd say, like most all of our figs that we have, the more sun we give them, the better fruiting we get. We do get much less fruit if it's not in ideal conditions. But doesn't mean if you don't have the perfect spot, you can't grow one. And there's different sizes. You can make one a little smaller just by trimming it. But then you get into the gophers, and gophers can make it smaller than you wanted it to be.
And if there was, do you have any other insights you'd add? Like if I was just going to say one thing you've learned about growing figs in your area, Renan, is there anything that pops to mind as far as care?
They love heat. They love heat and they love water. Like if you can give them both. Like I had variety. So Cordon Blanc is a variety that's known for being super slow. There's a couple people that they essentially don't prune it yearly because it doesn't grow much. And I had maybe 3 feet of growth on multiple branches throughout. And it didn't get a lot of water, but it got a lot of sun. My plants, the in-ground figs that I have are in bootjack, and it probably for 2 months, it was like highs of 110, and their nighttime lows were between 85 to 80 degrees. So yeah, they grew super fast.
So one of the things that I learned in spending some time in Japan with some fig growers is that water is really the gas pedal for the growth of figs. So if you want, just speaking to what you were saying, Renan, if you increase more water, that's going to dramatically increase the growth, the vegetative growth of the figs. And then when we get closer to cold snap, especially if you're somewhere like I am up in Felton where we get some pretty hard freezes, it's actually really a good idea to start pulling back water so that the fig can start to lignify. It can start to harden a little bit, so it'll have a better chance of being able to handle some of those cold snaps. So that was something that was really interesting. Is there anything in the community, again, because we're all learning with each other, is there anything else anyone would like to offer just of what you've learned about growing figs? Anything pop to mind? Yeah, Nadine.
This was not my innovation. I learned it from Terrence Welch, who some of you may know, and he got it from a grower in the Central Valley. But he told me, because I had so much bird damage in our 100 figs, to cut them down to 4 feet in the winter and net them all. And it's been amazing.
That's awesome. Yes, and that's a perfect setup. We didn't even plan this, but I'm going to show you. In Japan, they keep them really low. They actually call them step-over figs. So I took a little video the last time I was in Japan to show you what that's like. So thanks for the setup. That's perfect. If I was going to add a tip, the number one thing I would suggest is that big roots are absolutely go for candy. So if you're going to plant a fig tree, anywhere in our area, especially if you're in sandy soil, it's really worth it to get a really sturdy, big gopher basket for yourself. Because otherwise you'll find that, they'll let it go. They might let it go for a couple years and then they'll come after it. Now, one interesting thing John Valenzuela did share with me is that figs are so robust that sometimes the gophers can actually go to town and eat them, and they'll just keep sprouting up from the sides. And so I guess that's another way to play the odds and see if you luck out. So we do have two potential crops. This was something that was new to me, so I just want to touch upon it. So in figs, we have the Breba crop, which is our early figs that come on last year's wood. And they'll often ripen in spring or early summer. So it's kind of our early fig crop. And then there's a second crop, which is later on in the fall and early winter. And so when we talk about these things, I just wanted to give you a little guideline of main crop or Breba crop. That's what that stands for. So some fig varieties make an amazing two crops every year, and some only make one. So how do you know when they're ripe? I'm going to hand this over to you guys. Just give a quick overview. How do you know when a fig's ripe?
Growing up, I got to taste a bunch of different ones that we grew on the property. And when I was a little kid, if I wiggled it and it fell off in my hand, it was good to go. So that was my thing when I was a kid. I'd just wiggle it and, okay, it's good, and I'd eat it. Another one that not all figs do this, but sometimes they'll put out a little bit of nectar out that flower hole, I guess. And so that was another indicator to me when I was a kid that I could go up and just pick that thing and eat it. And sometimes I just go around and eat the nectar because fig nectar is awesome if you've never had it. So that's what I did. Do you have a...
Another way is you'll see the neck will start to dry up, and you'll actually start seeing some wrinkles. Some of the best figs that I've had were slightly dried, and they can start getting a really jammy texture, especially if the fig is already known for having a jammy texture.
And that's one of the side benefits of caprified figs. So caprified figs, caprification is just a fancy word for saying pollinated by the fig wasp. And one of the things that's been interesting to learn about as I was looking for some things that we could do for the black fig fly, caprification also tends to make the figs dramatically improve in flavor and in texture. So when we talk about that jammy, juicy texture, that's something that often is greatly amplified when the fig is caprified. So that's also kind of an exciting benefit. We might be able to grow healthier figs and more delicious figs at the same time. There's 4 types of figs. I just wanted to give this to you. I will post this presentation so that you have it if you're interested in this, but there are 4 different types of figs. And the reason I'm kind of pointing them out is because you'll see that on the bottom here is Capri figs. And Capri figs are what we're going to talk about at our very last kind of conversation here of what can we do as a community. And Capri figs is the name for the male figs. And those figs are where typically they're not edible, although Renan has some secrets up his sleeve, but they house the fig wasp. So in order to reliably have the fig wasp on your property, it's really great, at least in a neighborhood, to have at least one Capri fig as a home for those fig wasps. So here are just some inspiration. Again, these were in Japan. So this is an espalier. You can grow figs in lots of tiny places. They love, they totally are moldable. This is the step over fig. So kind of building on what Nadine was sharing. So they go even lower in Japan. They start them at 12 inches high. So they grow up one trunk, and then they take 2 cordons and they spread it here. And the reason they do that is similar to what Nadine was sharing for protecting from the birds. They protect from the frost in Japan. And so it's also really elegant. Like you see these this is a side shot. So these are just long rows of these long arms of figs. And then they have a little bamboo branch to just support that first year wood. And so it creates these really elegant, I kind of had this vision of like having a pathway and have step over figs like as the border. It would be beautiful. And here's a little video, let's see if I can get it to play, of some step over figs. So before winter, they actually, they surround them with a little bit of newspaper. And then this cage that they have over is twofold. So in the winter, they put over some cloth to be able to keep them from freezing. And then similar to what Nadine shares, then they put bird netting to harvest. And I just thought, what a beautiful, simple, manageable way to grow figs. All right, favorite fig varieties. So I asked some of the favorite fig varieties, and as we're sharing about these, also I'm going to welcome our community because I'd love to start creating kind of a catalog of what are the varieties that grow really great here, that taste great, and now we have this new element of which ones might be resistant to the black fig fly, which is going to be a really big deal in coming years. So first I'll give it over to Renan and he'll talk about his favorites.
So this one is Borgeso Grease. It's a really good fig to grow in colder areas because it starts off really early and it has a really long season. So you'll harvest that. That's typically one of the first figs that you harvest, and it's also typically one of the last. The flavor on it is great. It has a real strawberry jam like texture and taste. It has a compact growing habits, but it bears a lot. So it's probably the number one fig that I would recommend, especially like growing in areas where you have colder weather.
How cold?
What do you mean?
Where?
Like Santa Cruz where you're not getting much sun. Cold wise, it really depends. Like if you're on the area that you're in, like say your winters get super cold, cut them down to the ground or just mulch heavily to protect them, and then they'll sprout up in the spring. This is the Borgeso Grease Breba crop. So again, you have like that one was a little bit overripe, but you can see that like it has those purple like rings around it, and same thing like strawberry gem like interior. This is LDA or Langue d'Août. So it's a French variety. It's pretty big. It's another early heavy bearer. The figs are pretty good. They're not my favorite, but when you're growing figs in not ideal climates, sometimes you're a little bit restricted with what varieties you can grow. Italian 258 or Genovese Nero AF. So they're two different figs, but they're very likely to be synonyms. I mean, it's like with everything, like people have found figs and they're like both the size is very similar, the taste is very similar. So they have a rich berry flavor, moderate sweetness with some seed crunch, but it's also one of the ones that you can get by with. I would actually recommend this one regardless if you're in like a colder area or an area that doesn't get as much sun and heat, or if you are getting a bunch of sun and heat.
You'd recommend it in both?
Yeah. It's one worth having. Black Madeira, that's pretty much like people consider it the king of figs. It's a synonym with Figo Preto. So it's pretty small, it's sweet, it's richly flavored. One thing to note with this variety that depending on, so there's a disease called fig mosaic virus, and most figs have it, especially if you're getting it from a nursery. So depending on how affected it is, like the Black Madeira is known to be somewhat slow. There are different, depending on where you're sourcing it from, some of them have like grown so fast that they pretty much outgrow the FMV and they get really vigorous. But again, it's one of the they call it the king of figs.
And this one requires the fig wasp, right?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it's common.
Oh, you think it's common?
Yeah.
All right, Lyle.
Nash. Yeah, other than having a great name, it looks cool. They taste amazing. And I've only eaten this fruit like maybe in the last 3 years. And when I first ate it, having grown up eating figs, I was just like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. Why haven't I ever had one? So So these I grow at my dad's house. He's in the town of Harold, which is the post office that's 6 miles away from us. We live in the ghost town of Clay. There are ghost towns in California. But it gets really warm there. We have a lot of sun. So it's what this fig really likes, is a long growing season. So if you guys want to grow this one here, I'd say put it in a sunny hot spot next to a building or something where it can just get cooked all day and it would be so happy. But yeah, these are one of the top rated figs. And then Harold. This one is one of our little happy accidents. And it's amazing. I mean, you can look at it, it's super jelly. It is sort of like a raspberry flavor to it. Super sweet. We've dried it. It's amazing dried. I've made a jelly out of it where I just sort of boiled them down, cooked them into a jelly, and we had them on, I think like brie and crackers, and it was amazing. So, great flavor. And then Accelerator. So this is the one I was telling you about where, yeah, it was growing next to our deck. That's my dad. He was 80 years old in that picture. He's 82. But you can see the leaves were about like 2 feet wide. They were monstrous because he was growing in an area that was half sun. It only got sun after about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's how big the fruit got, even in a part shade conditions. And you can't quite tell, but it's underneath a pine tree. But it has a pretty good, it's got like a figgy flavor. It's, but it's got like a rich meatiness to it. We dried them and they were really good dried. It sort of brings out the flavor when you dry them. We've also heard them cooked onto pizzas, and they're amazing. So I was like, there's like nothing you can't do with them, So, yeah. So those are my favorites.
That's great. So for those of you who are familiar with Chadwick Garden, I thought I'd also just pull up some of these great notes. There's wonderful archives that Orrin Martin has created over the years for us, and so I just wanted to give him a shout out and to acknowledge him. These were some of the varieties that Orrin pointed out really thrive and do well in Santa Cruz. And so specifically, if you live somewhere that is similar in microclimate to UCSC, these are some of the varieties that Orrin suggested for that kind of microclimate. Black Mission, Blackjack, Brown Turkey, Osborne Prolific, and White Genoa. All right, so I just want to open up. Does anyone else have any favorites that absolutely must be named before we move on from varieties? Oh, I knew we'd get some. Okay, Kenny.
Violette de Bordeaux is really delicious.
Violette Bordeaux. What do you want to say about it? Because I agree that one's delicious.
They're small, but they get super tasty, prolific, and they're just really good.
Awesome. Violette Bordeaux, yes.
So we're on the west side, 3 blocks from the ocean, and it's hard to ripen any figs, but I've had luck with Col de Dame Gris and Black Ischia.
Beautiful. Perfect. Any others? Oh, yes.
I think my favorite is Flanders. So I agree, Violet Bordeaux is the most tasty one I grow, but Flanders produces a big breba crop and a big main crop. And you take it off the tree and it continues ripening until it turns to jelly jam.
Oh, yum. Flanders, that's new to me. Who else has a couple? Yes, Fred.
Yeah, I have an Italian everbearing, but spell check turns it into overbearing. It's got a huge breva crop. They're almost 3 inches long. Really good taste.
Wow. I'm getting excited about the sign exchange with all this. Who else has one? Nadine.
The only one I can think of that hasn't been mentioned by everyone else is Tashkent, which is an enormous, like palm-sized white fig. It is beautiful. It took many years to get established. It was slow, but it's a beautiful tree, and it's an enormous, jammy, like honey white fig. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is I also grow panache. I'm in Watsonville. It gets down to about 28 degrees, but we are in full sun. And although panache is beautiful, and I have tasted delicious ones from the Central Valley, it doesn't get hot enough, long enough for them to ripen at my farm, and I think that could be a problem across Santa Cruz County.
That's great. And so this is part of the information that I'm hoping we can start to collect on this document that I put together that I'll just show you, is just start sharing these little tidbits of, what's it like? What are your growing conditions? What's really doing great for you? Freddie and Ellen, any you want to add?
You talked about Desert King and the Manzanita Black.
We haven't talked about those yet.
Black Manzanita. I'm on the Subtitles. So
The what?
I'm in the Subtitles, so it's really cool. It's close to the ocean. I don't have enough heat to ripen the black mission, but I can ripen the black Manzanita. Main crop. I don't know if it makes a Brava crop, but it's pretty new. I haven't seen a Brava crop. But Desert King makes a huge Brava crop and ripens the main crop once you get your wasp population established. So I didn't have a main crop for 10 years, but for the last 10 years I've had a big main crop as well as a huge Brava crop. And that's, again, I have no heat, but I ripen big jam.
That's amazing. So if you're in La Selva kind of area, Black Manzanita.
Well, I think that applies to anywhere, coastal Capitola, coastal Santa Cruz, anywhere you're not back in the Columbia. And then also I think I have Italian everbearing, which makes a beautiful Brava crop and a fantastic main crop. And it's a black fig, it's a huge delicious fig.
Great. So we've got Desert King, Black Manzanita, and Italian overbearing. Great. Okay, well now I would love we're going to transition and learn a little bit more from our research team here on what they've learned about the black fig flies. So we'll welcome up Mel and Houston. Let's give them a round of applause for showing up for us. So I'll go ahead and I'll pull up your presentation. Do you want to just give a little bit of an overview of this up here while it's here?
Yeah, sure. While you get the presentation loaded. Don't clap yet. I'm bringing all the bad news. So thank you so much for the invitation to come share about the research that we've been doing in my lab and Mel is now taking the lead on, all centered around the black fig fly. When we get my talk loaded, I'll kind of step by step go through the series of events here, but this is a newly invasive pest. It's very specialized on figs. One of the first things we did once we started responding to it was put together this pest alert. And so we have some printed out here. When we get into my talk, there's like a QR code. You can zap that and download the PDF or just email me so I don't think we printed anywhere close to enough for everybody. It's been quite a challenge to deal with this thing. And sort of the way we structure this work, it's both like a short and long-term research program. So what you'll hear about primarily at this point, it's new developments in how to monitor it, how to control it with OMRI-approved organic pesticides. But in the long term, there's work to develop cultural practices, biological control, things like that. So we kind of need to get stuff together for folks to do next year, but then at the same time work on things that typically take a little bit longer to put together. So as mentioned, I'm Houston Wilson. I'm an Associate Cooperative Extension Specialist in the Department of Entomology at UC Riverside. My geography is a little bit confusing because I am a faculty who was hired to be based off campus. So I've never really lived in Riverside or anything. I'm based at the Kearney Agricultural Research and Extension Center, which is in Parlier. That's about 20 to 30 minutes south of Fresno. And I've been out there since 2017. And I was hired to take on entomology and pest management issues, specifically in deciduous tree and vine crops across the entire state. And so we do a lot of work on almonds and pistachios and walnuts and wine grapes. We do some olive stuff. We work on figs. And we even have this little nascent hemp cannabis IPM program. So figs are kind of funny to include in my work because in California terms, the relevant terms, it's a small crop, 6,000 acres. For other states, that's like a huge crop. But, we have 2 million acres of tree nuts in the state. But the commercial fig production that takes place in California is just north of Fresno in Madera and Merced County. That's where all those 6,000 acres are concentrated primarily. And so because of that proximity, the California Fig Institute approached me early on and kind of setting up my research and extension program and asked me to work on some issues in figs around some other pests, the dried fruit beetle and then the navel orange worm. But when this thing came into California, that kind of led to them contacting us and picking up this pest as well. Melissa, do you want to or Mel, introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Melissa or Mel. I just started as a graduate student for Dr. Wilson's lab. So I am based down in Riverside. So I just want to say thank you for having us all here today. My background is a little bit in the same thing that Houston Wilson's whole lab studies, but I worked at UC Berkeley for a few years on grapevines, other pome fruit, so apples, pears, and as well as tree nuts and everything. But I'm just really excited to be talking to you all today. So thank you for having us.
Thanks. And to be clear, when I say entomology and pest management issues, everything in our lab falls under the umbrella of developing practices that can help growers reduce pesticide use and pesticide impacts in their crops. So that's primarily the direction we're going with all this work. So Mel and I are here today, but I just want to acknowledge the broader research team that has worked on this project at one time or another. You have Phoebe Gordon. She's the farm advisor up in Madera, Merced County, so she's primarily taking all the commercial fig questions. Sonia Rios, the subtropical horticulture advisor down in Southern California, dealing with there are some commercial fig operations down there. She was dealing with Ben Faber out on the Central Coast in Ventura, another farm advisor. Similarly, working on tree fruit production out there. And then we've been working with Neil McRoberts. He's a plant pathologist by training, but also does a lot of population modeling and stuff. And I'll talk about that work when we get there. And then a series of postdocs or PhD students, Katie Britt, followed by Vale Ibrahimi, and now Mel Thayer, all working on this. So it's been a multi-year project and a large research team we've put together. So black fig fly, it is native to the Mediterranean and Middle East. So you look in the early scientific literature, turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. There's a lot of work coming out of Greece and Italy, and then more recently in Tunisia and France. So this is where it's from. It's a Mediterranean insect. In 2007, there were the first reports of it. I have this nice pointer, and yet I always want to go touch the screen. So South Africa, 2007. Sort of a one-off thing. I guess it's down there. I haven't really seen any other further work out of the researchers down there. And then in 2019, we started to hear reports of it in Mexico, and then it arrived in California in 2021. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Just basic biology and ecology of this insect before we get into the kind of step-by-step progression of events in California. So this thing overwinters as a pupae in the soil. And in the spring, they'll complete development, the adults will come out of the soil, and they have a very strong preference to lay their eggs into unripe figs. So they lay their eggs right there at the ostiole, the only little opening you've got into that fig. The larvae will then feed on the synconium, so that outer layer of the fruit. Once they finish their development in there, they'll tunnel their way out, drop down to the soil, and pupate again, and then you get another adult come out, and the whole thing goes again. So just some pictures here we caught live in the field of this thing laying its eggs down there. You can see that feeding damage as you cut open the fig. You'll see this kind of brown tunneling thing. You can even see the exit hole on some of these green figs, and then they don't like to pupate in the fruit, but they can do that. So we'll sometimes see pupae in there as well, but really they like to come out and go down into the soil. And keep that in mind because there are probably some management opportunities there to interfere with that whole process. They are known to have 4 to 6 generations per year in Mediterranean climates. We're still trying to establish what that looks like here in California, also Mediterranean, so we expect to see something close to that. And the degree days, that's the number of temperature units they need to complete development. We haven't ever characterized that. That's something we've been trying to do in the lab, but it's a very difficult insect to hold in the lab. It requires unripe figs. It's really challenging to get them to mate in a cage. Mel can speak more to that. But that's kind of the basic overview of their life cycle. As I mentioned, they have a strong preference for unripe fruit. So there's some researchers in Israel that we have connected with a few years ago, and they were really excited that we had it in California, not because of any, malintention or anything, but it was like, oh, you guys can start working on it too. Like, we've been studying this thing. Like, they had all this information to share. And they had done some really cool work where they were measuring the volatiles given off by fig fruits before and after pollination. And that bouquet of compounds changes pretty dramatically after the pollination process takes place. And then they were able to expose fig flies to those different compounds and see that they would respond very differently. Like, once a fig had become pollinated, they would smell whatever it's giving off and bolt and go away. And so there was some interesting work we were trying to put together at the time. This is back in 2021. Could you synthesize that compound and spray it on a tree and make your tree repellent? So we have not been funded to do that work, but that was kind of an interesting thing that we saw. The infested fruit, as you've probably experienced, it's green fruit, it drops to the ground. That's kind of how you know you might have an issue. You start looking at those fruits, cutting them open, looking for the sign of the tunneling, looking for the exit holes and all that. If you really train your eye, and I don't really recommend people try to do this, but some of our lab technicians and other people who have been dealing with this for a long time, you kind of get this pruning on the green fruit. I don't know if any of y'all have seen, I'm seeing heads nod out here. So that's one way you can tell, oh, there might be a black fig fly in there and the fruit hasn't yet dropped. And it has a terrible name, black fig fly, and then you do the acronym BFF. This thing is the opposite of your BFF. So monitoring and management. So the standard currently is to use these McPhail type traps, and Mel will talk a little bit more about them. We've got some of them up here, baited with this Torula yeast dissolved into about half a liter of water that you pour into the trap. There is some work we've been doing with this 2% ammonium sulfate and hexanol solution. I'll let Mel talk all about that and why we're trying to look at other lures, but this is kind of the standard to put these things out with these lures. This is what CDFA uses in their regional surveys, and this is what we did as well initially. We don't really have an idea of what the economic threshold is. So how many of these, how many fruits can be infested in your orchard before you need to treat? Given how they work with hitting unripe fruits and then dropping down to the ground and potentially using that as a host until they go on and pupate, crop sanitation, we think that's really important. So getting all those dropped figs out of there as soon as you can. Chemical control options are really difficult. The whole life cycle's inside that fruit. Any contact type product is really difficult. So we've been doing some work with some insecticidal baits that are primarily certified for use in organic production. Again, Mel will kind of talk about some of that. So here's what happened in California, and I'm just trying to kind of set the stage before Mel gives all the research updates. So like I said, you had these reports from Mexico in 2019, 2020, the USDA Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, so the people that deal with importing and exporting fruits, they upped the radiation limits for incoming fig fruits, trying to clear out any bugs from any of the figs coming in from Mexico. But even doing that, we started to get reports in the spring, summer of 2021 of infested fruits, primarily in Southern California and then kind of the southern Central Coast area, Ventura and Santa Barbara counties in particular. So at that point, we went out to check out these infestations, and this was my first real exposure to the California Rare Fruit Growers Association because, as I said, all of that commercial production is up in Madera and Merced counties. That's where I primarily engage with the fig industry. And we went throughout Ventura and Santa Barbara and Riverside and San Diego County and met dozens of backyard rare fruit growers that just had, like what y'all were describing, some of the wildest varieties I'd ever heard of. When you put the question, what's your favorite fig variety? I feel super lame. I'm like, Black Mission, I guess, and I feel like that's like someone to be booed out of the room. Yeah, I know, exactly. And so these things, this guy's running a cocoa factory in Santa Barbara, but has this whole fig thing going on the side. That's the UCSB student garden. Like, there's some random guy in Riverside in his backyard, and it was just like a jungle of figs. And he's also a dragon fruit breeder. But tried all these different things and some of the most interesting and delicious figs I'd ever tested. One guy had a tree, and it was from Vatican City, and it was Scion, and it had been blessed by the Pope, and he brought it. It was unbelievable. But
is that the only one that's the black fly fig can't?
Yeah, he just kind of, No, it seemed to really go for that one, actually. I don't know. But it was amazing, and it was really interesting, and I had never really dealt with production at that scale. We have a University of California Small Farms program. We have a UC Master Gardeners program. That's probably the folks you are engaging with more frequently than me out in Fresno dealing with 6,000 acres of figs or whatever. But and we have been working with those teams. They're aware of this insect, and they know to reach out to us if there's questions. And so, one of the first things we did is put together this pest alert as well as a website. So like I said, we've got some printed out here. You can download that. I can share this PDF with y'all, whenever. So just basic overview. Do you want to actually hand these out to some people? I mean, I don't know if the first 20 people in the audience are going to take them all. And sorry, folks in the back. But we have it in both English and Spanish. The distribution that's listed in there should be updated. We made that in 2021, and I'll talk about the subsequent spread. But put that together, just what do we know about this fly right now? Let's aggregate all that information and get it in people's hands. And then we also created the Black Fig Fly website. The website address is a little small up there, but again, I can share all this with you. This is where we've just been aggregating more information as we learn more about it, update what we know about trapping and where it is and things like that. So we did that, and then finally the research part, so regional delineation and modeling, and then these trap and lure as well as spray trials. So the habitat suitability model, what we were really concerned about when it was initially just in Southern California and kind of moving its way up the Central Coast, the question that was put to us is, what is given what we know about this fly, can it make its way into the Central Valley? Can it persist under those environmental conditions? And so we partnered with Neil McRoberts and his team at UC Davis and basically aggregated every known record of black fig fly from around the world. And you can use that information to match the climate and the habitat types that they're being found in and compare that to what's in California. And for our commercial fig industry, it is not very good news. The highest area of suitability appears to be the San Joaquin Valley. So that's right in the center of where commercial fig production is occurring. But you can see here, if you look closely, the colors aren't really that great, but these are all these little red dots. These are all the confirmed finds from throughout kind of the South Coast area, creeping up here, up into Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. And then even these finds more recently in the Bay Area, kind of San Luis Obispo area. So it just kind of keeps making its way up. And then there's the survey and delineation that we did, outside of the modeling to actually confirm and just sort of track this thing. So initially we were doing a lot of intensive monitoring down in Southern California, but also up here, Madera, Merced, where all that commercial production's happening. And that was augmented by the CDFA Division of Plant Health and Pest Prevention, as well as County Agricultural Commissioners. So all these folks are out there monitoring as well. So I'll just wrap up with this. This is kind of the current distribution. Started in SoCal, it's moved its way all the way up here to the Bay Area. We had a report on fig trees outside of Bakersfield last year, and that was the first time we'd heard of it being in the Central Valley and wondering about the winter conditions. Could it survive? Could it make it into the next year? If you've ever driven out there when you're heading east out of Bakersfield up into the Tehachapi, there's like this country pie place that's kind of a big tourist stop, and that guy is actually a big fig grower. He's got all these different varieties, and that's where we found it first. So it did persist there over the winter, so that shows that it probably can, confirming that model that it can make its way up here. And then just 2-3 months ago, I got a call from another small grower, bought trees at Home Depot in Sacramento. They were all infested with black fig fly, and so now CDFA is monitoring that. So, of course, the concern, we still haven't found it in these commercial zones, but you got it to the north, you got it to the south, you got the model, and I know you're like, whatever, these commercial guys out there can do what they want. They're not us, but that's kind of where we're at this point. And so now I'll hand it over to Mel and just look forward to more discussion, talking about, control options and things y'all have been doing, and kind of learn from y'all what your experience has been as well. So thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Just as a second introduction, I am Melissa Thayer, or Mel Thayer. I'm a graduate student with Dr. Wilson at his lab as a PhD student. And today I will just update you quickly on the current and future research for the black fig fly, or Silva adipata. So this is just a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today. I just wanted to talk about our research scope. Houston has talked about it just a little bit, about at what scale we work, as well as the research on the phenology and the monitoring, as well as a lure comparison, so different baits using to attract black fig fly, as well as some spray trials that we've done to try to control the black fig fly, as well as the next steps. As well as the next steps that we plan to take to kind of understand this pest a little bit better. So our research scope, as he has kind of well established, is that we're focused a lot more on larger scale growing. All this research that you see today also is conducted in Ventura, San Diego, and Kern, which is a little bit warmer than you guys, but it can still be applicable. And as well as that there's no pollination varieties in any of this research, so they're common figs like Cristy taught us today. And so I just wanted to discuss what that means for you all. Even though this research doesn't directly apply to a backyard grower, you guys can do a lot more than we can, just given the scale that you work at. But I just want you to take this all kind of with a grain of salt. Know that people care about your figs, and that we are looking forward to kind of better understanding this pest in the future. So first, I'm going to get into the monitoring. The monitoring has been going on since 2022 in some places, including the Central Coast, which is Ventura, so it's the very, very bottom of the Central Coast, as well as in Southern California and 3 orchards in San Diego County. We just started monitoring in Central Valley and Bakersfield, like Houston had mentioned, and we started in 2024, so that data will be a little bit sparser, but it will be updated quickly. So for the monitoring, we're using Torula yeast bait, which are basically these little tablets. And as Houston mentioned before, we mix 4 of these tablets in each McPhail trap here with about a half liter of water. So we use the McPhail type traps to monitor all of these places. And in each orchard, we have 4 traps. All right, so for our monitoring so far, like I had said, we started in 2022 in a lot of these places in Southern California, as well as the Central Coast. And what we've been seeing is that by May, we get a slight bit of activity, but by June and July, it's really picked up, meaning that it's gotten hot enough for the fly to be moving around. It's smelling out for food. It's looking for our bait, that Torula yeast. And I just wanted to basically summarize that, and that we had low activity in the spring, and those first peaks again in May. So by June and July, you should see that damage that Houston was talking about if you do have black fig fly in your home orchards. And also, I just wanted to remind everyone that we're still processing the samples from 2024, so hopefully by the time we're done doing that, we'll have a little bit of a better idea of what's happening out there in the orchards in California. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was lure comparison. So this is using different baits to attract the black fig fly so we can better monitor them in the future. So this study here is located in Ventura. We used, again, these McPhail type traps. And I'm going to be talking about 2 studies today. So in experiment 1, we were trying 4 different lures. We tried a control, which is just water in the trap, just to kind of back check ourselves on our own data. As well as ammonium sulfate, which Houston has mentioned, ammonium sulfate plus a hexanol. So hexanol is basically just a plant metabolite that attracts the black fig fly. And it is kept up in this little filter. In that picture, it's green, so you can see that we've modified this McPhail trap, and as well as the Torula yeast. And then in the second experiment, you'll see why we left that Torula yeast out, but basically we are just doing a bunch of different combinations of hexanol and ammonium sulfate, just trying to see what we could best monitor the black fig fly with. So experiment 1, you can see that huge blue bar there, and that's your Torula yeast. A lot of people use Torula yeast for other insects like the olive fruit fly, if you guys have olive trees in your backyard. So the Torula yeast obviously catches a lot of black fig fly in comparison to these other different lures. But on the right side, we have our bycatch, which is basically all of the non-target insects that we don't want to catch when we're looking for black fig fly. And so it's really difficult to actually dig through what you catch in these traps because it's just astronomical, the amount of stuff that you get. And I will show you a picture in a moment. I just wanted to first point out the scale also. So we get about 60 black fig fly a week with Torula yeast as a bait, but 600 individuals on top of that, that it's just the non-target. So it's really difficult to see the black fig fly in any of these baits. And so this is what a Torula yeast bait trap looks like. Again, you can see it's basically black. I don't have a picture of one with the yeast blooming, but if you imagine you're making some nice bread, you want to bloom your yeast and it gets kind of puffy, you know? That's what happens in these traps too. So they're nice and stinky, but they just don't really work very well for us to be able to quickly assess how infested that tree is or how infested that orchard is. So going on to experiment 2, we wanted to kind of hone in on what hexanol can do and if we can see any better results with these types of lures. And so we have hexanol, ammonium sulfate plus hexanol, as well as 2 versions with filtered hexanol, which basically just better controls the release of the hexanol for the black fig fly to find it easier. And so what we see here is we have a bunch of different letters. If any of the bars have different letters like A and B, that just means they're statistically different from one another. So that means that they're pretty spot on when spot on with their data, basically. So we can see here we have another big blue line, and that is the ammonium sulfate with hexanol filter. And in this scenario, we're catching about 20 black fig fly a week, which is about 1/3 of what we caught with the Torula yeast. But what you can see here is the ammonium sulfate blue bar on the right side is that we only get about 40 extra individuals as bycatch. So we're seeing that it's pretty promising in finding the black fig fly, or I guess attracting the black fig fly. And so this is that Torula yeast picture again, and this is the ammonium sulfate with hexanol. And so you can see them, you can just count them straight out. You don't have to strain anything or dig through any insects. So it's a lot easier to use this as a lure in comparison to the Torula. And that's probably what you kind of find when you're doing this for your olives too, if you have olive fruit fly. So the lure comparison, just overall, the Torula yeast is really effective at trapping that black fig fly, but we get that kind of messiness in the bottom of the McPhail trap. While the ammonium sulfate and hexanol with that filter modification is just the cleanest by far and is the most easy to use. So moving on to spray trials. We've done a few spray trials, but it hasn't worked out so well with the control numbers. We're all about statistics here and making sure things are significant. So I just wanted to talk about how we do our spray trials mostly today and our results from this year. So the infestation is evaluated by basically picking 5 figs on a given tree. Each of the trees have 5 figs that are painted that each of our lab techs are coming back to weekly 4 times after spraying. And so they check them for infestation. If they've dropped on the ground, if they're looking like they have that pruning or some sort of discoloration, they'll take them off, and then they'll check if they're infested. So they monitor those figs every week for 4 weeks. And again, we have 2 different experiments. Experiment 1 is more of a commercial type application and treatment, but we use Danitol and Delegate as well as our control. And then in the second experiment, we use GF120, which is a OMRI certified product that uses spinosad as an active ingredient. And so you can see here on our far left, we have the control. Then we have the Danitol in the middle, as well as Delegate on the right side. And like I said before, those that have different letters from each other mean that they're are statistically different from one another. So Danitol and Delegate are different. And Danitol has a very low 4.7% infestation rate, but it is not significantly different from the control. So the control had too low of an actual infestation rate for us to make the call that it actually worked better. And so moving on to the second experiment, which was in a different field because of the bait, but the control had a lower infestation rate than that treatment again. GF120 had 28.6% infested figs, while control had 24%, meaning again, we couldn't draw a conclusion as to whether that worked better or not. And so for our spray trials, again, that control infestation really messed us up. So we need to continue doing more studies, and we will continue to do more studies just to inform you guys as well as the growers in the valley and everywhere else. So as far as next steps for our research, we're going to continue monitoring to understand the phenology, which is basically just its life cycle throughout the year. Then we're going to try to develop a dry trapping system. You can imagine carrying one of these per tree of yours in an orchard, as well as the water and other liquids that you need to fill them up. Kind of gets heavy and it kind of gets tiresome. So we want to make it a lot easier for people to be able to monitor their populations. We also are going to continue with that chemical control, especially including that OMRI certified or that organic certified treating. Then for my own research and dissertation, I kind of want to get into the developmental biology, so how deep they pupate in the soil, meaning that if we understand this, we could understand different soil treatments to actually control the black fig fly, as well as the overwintering survival, what factors make them overwinter better and have higher survival rates, as well as their temperature requirements for just their development over time. And so with that, I want to say thank you to the Fig Institute, as well as our growers and our cooperators, and the people that actually put all this work on together, Valerie and Amanda. And so thank you. Yeah, hi.
Are there any natural predators that you could encourage yourself to all releasing?
So we have read a few papers, some from, I believe, in Asia, and they've said that they have seen some sort of biological control component, but we have not been able to explore that ourselves. But I do want to put a few figs aside as we collect them for our colony and just kind of watch to see what comes out to make note of that. So that's on our mind for sure.
I'll just have one. Or I'll just my outdoor voice. Yeah, so there's one parasitoid that's ever been reported attacking black fig fly pupae. It was decades ago, and it's a species we have in California, but it's a very generalist species. It's known to parasitize like 60 different insects, and so those tend to not be very ideal for a biocontrol program because they're just kind of going all over the place. But as Mel said, she's going to do this survey of natural enemies to see what potentially might be attacking it here. So that's definitely something we want to prioritize.
Yes.
Well, in the study, I was just wondering where the Torula yeast caught all these other insects.
Yeah.
Was there any analysis as to whether all those other 600 contained a lot of other harmful insects or beneficial insects?
No. So as you can imagine, it takes a long time to count through those samples. And so we're really just looking for those black fig fly in that moment. It would be very beneficial to do. So we could look into it as well.
Things that respond to those, that's like a rotting sort of smell, and it's a lot of detrivores and other sort of neutral to maybe some other pest insects. We typically don't see like spiders and lacewings and things like that going to that sort of smell.
Never any like pollinators like bees or anything?
Yeah.
Is it capturing thrips or aphids or other stuff that could be?
Not aphids, no. Sure, go ahead.
Just to offer one season of feedback, Kenny, I did this past year. I did a McPhail trap and did one with ammonium sulfate and one with Torula yeast. And the one with Torula yeast, in fact, I have a photo of it. I'll show you in a second. In my orchard, it collected a ton of the olive fly. So I had a ton of those, a lot of the spotted winged Drosophila that was attacking berries, and the black fig fly. So I was kind of excited about the fact that it was like full, So anyway, that was just one season, but I thought that was kind of encouraging. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to ask real quick if there were any beneficials that are attracted by that, or if they tend to all be pests in the fruit fly family.
Yeah, again, I can't say that for sure since we didn't look at that specifically, but I wouldn't say that we saw anything like lacewings or other pollinators and biological control of that thing. But thank you. Yes.
Your map showed the distribution from Southern California up to San Francisco, and that occurred in about a year?
Over about a 3-year period.
Okay.
Yeah, so the find from Alameda County up in the Bay was last fall. And so, yeah, that was the first I'd heard of it there. And the previous summer, I was hearing stuff from San Luis Obispo, Paso Robles. So it's just kind of.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the cause of that distribution is?
Well, I mean, there's no quarantine on the insect. So theoretically, you could have people moving fruit around. That's, we talked to CDFA a lot about that. And they were like, we just can't put the resources towards an insect that when we first became aware of it was spread throughout Southern California. They were like, you can't quarantine an area like that. So it also can fly, and it's a bigger fly. And so I think there's definitely some self-distribution, going on. And that's about as good as we can guess.
It's Highway 101.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, sure. I mean, that's not uncommon with invasive insects. If you overlay where they're being found with major roadways and transportation, you can't track that.
That's great.
Yes, in the back.
I kind of wanted to get a general, show of hands, who's growing figs and who's had black fig fly, because I've had both, so.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for bringing that up. So that's what we're going to transition to next, and we'll continue to field questions as we go. But I think the question now is, okay, we have this amazing research, and thank you both so much for everything that you're doing. How can we apply it now into our backyards? I think that's the next question. And how can we cooperate with each other so we don't all have to learn the hard way on some of these things? And so I think that's one of the potentials we have in our community uniquely, is that we're so connected with each other, sharing ideas. And so I think that'd be a great thing we can transition to. Go ahead. Do you have something?
I think I'd love to do that. But what has happened in the Mediterranean, where it's been there forever, and the farmers are dealing with this, what methods have they used?
Probably your best resource is this website about black fig fly put together by a French fig farmer. Has anybody seen this? It has like a big yellow background. It's
yes.
silvaadipata.fr. something, and he has been, I think it's a he, been doing a lot of mass trapping. So using traps that are available with lures that are in Europe. It's been really difficult for us to bring those over to California. It has all sorts of anecdotal stuff. When I talk to the researchers, there's not really many people working on it at this point. And the one guy, there's a lot of literature by that guy, Katsoyanos. He's out of Greece. And I tracked this dude down. Like, I found his Gmail and finally got him on Facebook to talk to me. And super helpful guy.
I bet.
And he, because I brought that question, I was like, what are y'all doing about this? And he's like, not much. Like, nobody really seems to matter. It drops some figs. And I think I was kind of surprised by that, but I think, my understanding of commercial fig production, if you look globally, we're not a huge global player. There's a ton of stuff in Turkey, and it's all these little guys like putting together their crops in little trucks and driving them to a processor. And it may be that they're just kind of taking some hit, but it seems like there would be more to know there. And I really have not been able to find any other resources online. I don't know if you've seen anything in your kind of lit review stuff, but it's surprising how little information but check out that website, because there's a lot of growers in California that have come to me and said, I'm talking to this guy, he's telling me XYZ, and like, we are definitely not the knowledge centers. It's like there's people out there with experiential knowledge that I think it's really important.
And Renan will share that, because Renan sent that to me right when this first came out. Yeah, go ahead, Lyle.
I was just wondering, did he say what their infection rates are in the Mediterranean with that?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't think of that off the top of my head. I think in some papers they were publishing.
I actually have an answer on the screen. Cute, that was an amazing lead-in. Thanks, guys. So similarly, I had a similar thought of what's happening in other countries. And so I did start looking in the research. And so this comes out of somewhere in the Middle East, actually. But this is what got me so excited about what might be a really simple solution for us, in that this study they looked at unpollinated figs, and about 60% were affected by black fig fly. And of the pollinated figs, only 0.55% were infested. And so that's a huge difference. And part of it seems to be these volatile compounds. And so thank you for alluding to that. I think that there might be, and again, part of this will be us experimenting, because I think we're more nimble than some of these bigger organizations, right? We have the opportunity to try lots of things, share with each other. But as I was looking at this, I was just so impressed with that striking difference. That seemed like a great place to start. And so that's what I just want to make sure we have enough time, because I promised Billy we're going to be ready when the fish is hot. So we've got 20 minutes. left. And so I just thought we could just do a quick summary and a brain think together, and also field any questions that you still might have on what can we do as a community. So I think one of the answers is we can consider planting more of these male Capri figs so we have more hosts for the fig wasp. I think that could be a great potential. And Lyle's going to share with us, he actually brought some cuttings for us of a wild male Capri fig so that we can all go home with one. I'll go ahead and let you speak to it real quick.
So like I said before, we discovered this one up in the foothills of, it's near the town of Martel. And we were coming back from doing some work up there and went, holy cow, check out this fig. And then when we saw the fruit, we said, holy cow again, because I've never seen a red fruit. So this is our Wally's Red. That's the one in the big container here. So we originally got this one to do our own hybridization. And I think you have a picture of one of the male figs opened up. Oh, there it is. Oh, so here it is, Wally in wild. Yeah, he's growing out of a rock wall on a bridge over a creek. So he's got nonstop water year round. And the county keeps cutting him back. Oh, okay. So yeah, I guess I'd. Yeah. So.
Go ahead.
Here.
And so Lyle brought cuttings for us for anyone who'd like to propagate it. And then he also will have for sale some rooted figs as well. So some of his fig varieties, he'll have them outside afterwards. But also in other chapters, they're trying other things. And I thought that would be neat to have Renan share about what other CRFG chapters are doing as well. So go ahead, Renan.
So one of the methods is a physical method where you bag figs. It is time consuming, but getting them through, you do want to use stiffer bags. There's links at the end of the presentation for it. So the stiffer bags keep the fig kind of in the middle, so the fig wasp or the BFF is unable to like deposit their eggs, and with that you're able to save your figs. Also, it does protect against some other pests like rats and other rodents. So with those specific bags, my friends have found that they've actually gotten the fig wasp to crawl in and caprify their figs.
It's small, it's a big enough hole or
They're almost like walking in. They're using toggles, and like I said, all of this is linked. There's direct links at the end, but they were able to go through. They've used fishnet bags, but because the fig wasp is really small, so it was able to completely get through those. But there's a lot less success with those. But the fishnet, the hole is big enough for the wasp to just go through, but not big enough or small enough that it keeps the BFF from entering.
Yeah.
And Renan was quite kind enough. We'll have some direct links to the bags that they found most effective in other chapters, so you can access those. Lyle had a cute thing about we can always encourage predators. That's adorable.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So one thing I have found out, we got this by accident. Our neighbor grows a bunch of chickens and sells the eggs. And so they've been jumping the fence and they've been eating our figs. And they've also been doing the cleanup where we don't get the figs falling on the ground. So I guess if you don't mind chickens eating a few of your figs, let some chickens loose in there, and they're a little irritating, but yeah, we don't ever have to clean up. So that's one other pest reduction, you could do, is have some chickens around.
Well, I think that's part of why it's so interesting to learn about the research. So Mel gave us a couple tips. So one thing that struck me as you were speaking is about these volatile compounds when a fig is caprified and how that dramatically changes the attraction to the black fig fly. But the other opportunity we have is that they pupate in the ground. And so any type of cleanup that we can do, whether it's us or we put animals to work in like a silver pasture kind of situation to do cleanup, is going to really dramatically help as well. So thanks for bringing that up. This was actually in my orchard. This was a trap that I just took out last week. And so we've tried both. And again, both of them are catching, but it's dramatically catching a whole lot more with the Torula yeast bait. So that was really neat to see your literature. And again, I think it'd be interesting for us in this document that I'm going to share, for those of us who are going to put out traps or to try some of these things, just to share with each other, like when we check our traps, what are we catching? So far I haven't seen any beneficials in my traps with the Torula yeast, but it'd be great for us all to pull in some information. And then we can also start tracking which varieties are more resistant. So some particular figs have a smaller closed ostiole, that little opening. And so one of the theories is that closed eye figs or smaller osteoles might be a little bit less susceptible to the BFF. So that's another thing that I think as a community we can start tracking. Which chapter is this that started, or where did you get this information?
This was from a Facebook group called Growing Figs While Battling BFF. Again, this is linked at the end. But UP, or Unknown Pestilier, and Yellow Longneck. Unknown Pestilier is really good, but it seems to, like, somebody took both of those figs out and they dramatically decreased their BFF load.
Go ahead, Kenny.
I just have this one question. Something I don't think I understand is, like in the earlier slide, it said that the San Pedro and the Smyrna were the ones pollinated by the fig wasp, and that the others are self-pollinating. So I don't quite see, if you're growing those varieties, then what's the benefit of the Capri and the fig wasp?
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that although they can be self-pollinated, they all can be pollinated by the fig wasp. And that was something interesting too, that the flavor and texture is dramatically improved when they're caprified. So even though they're not reliant on it to produce, they will produce better fruit, is my understanding. Is that your understanding as well? Okay. So cleaning up dropped fruit, like we talked about, is another really important thing. Where do you suggest, one of the questions I had is, where would be the best place to dispose of this dropped fruit? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, we just typically recommend that you put them in like a double plastic bag and just throw them in the trash. And, that should be enough to contain them from coming out or anything like that.
What? We got lots of questions. Okay, yes.
Shouldn't you just like microwave them or bake them or something to make sure everything's dead?
Yes, but do not bring them to our next potluck. We're not interested. Yes.
But still get out.
If you have a radiator, you can also use that.
But what occurs to me is like maybe we could drown them, we could burn them, we could.
But putting them in the trash, the bag could break and get spread all over the place.
Sure.
Yeah.
We typically are just trying to give the most kind of easy route for people to do that. But yeah, you definitely have a risk. You could do that double bagging in a black trash bag and leave it out in the sun for a week or something and kind of cook them.
We double bagged in a Ziploc and kept it on our table in the sun. And so to see them get cooked. It was
very satisfying.
It was very satisfying.
We're taking a dark turn here. Okay, so I'm just going to show you this, and then we'll go ahead and field questions until we're up on time. So this is the document that I just started. I'll send out a link to everyone in our community afterwards on this. And I'm really open to other fields that we might want to collect as well. But the idea is that we'd have this big working document where we can put in what we're growing, where we are, so we have a little bit of a microclimate idea. And then is the bit black fig fly present on your site? What are the varieties you're growing, and are they being damaged, and by what percentage of the fruit is dropped? Like, for example, for me, I just put in some information here that, the particular varieties seem to be dramatically more impacted. So that was something that was interesting to notice, and it'll be neat to see trends. And then also, I think keeping track of the remedies that we're trying. So, what kinds of traps, are we picking things up? What are we all doing? And then any other observations, things that we can pull together. And so I thought, when we put in our varieties as well, we might want to throw in some tasting notes because it's nice to know. I mean, what we're hoping to rise to the top are the most delicious figs that will grow really great in our area that also might be more resistant to this pest. That would be the hope. So here are some resources, and I'll send this to you so that the links will be active. Do you just want to speak quickly, Renan, to them?
So the first link is a mesh bag from AliExpress. The second one is it's a similar bag, but it's through Amazon, so it'll likely come a little bit quicker. That third link is the toggles that are used with it. So my friends found a lot of success using those toggles to keep it tight, but the fig wasp was still able to get in there and caprify or pollinate the fig. The last one on there is the fishnet type bags. They were a little bit less successful than the mesh bags, but I want to say they were a little bit cheaper, and it's something worth trying if you're really adamant to, or if you're growing like varieties that need to be pollinated or caprified in order for you to get fruit. And then there's 2 Facebook groups. So the Growing Figs While Battling Black Fig Fly. So that one, I want to say it's all through California. Brian Melton, he goes by ProFig. I believe he started the group, and pretty much people are sharing their different experiences. We have a bunch of people in SoCal that have been dealing with it for a while. So that's where one of the guys, he has a bunch of different varieties, and getting rid of unknown pestilier and yellow longneck, like it reduced his black fig fly load a lot. And the last one is California Figs Forum. Again, that one's put on by Brian Melton, and people are just sharing a bunch of different experiences. It's not just like pest related, but it's a good resource if you guys are raising or growing figs.
And so the last thing, and then we will take a few more questions, is Lyle brought some resources to share with us. And so I just wanted to give you a chance real quick, just a couple minutes to share what you brought. Okay. And then we'll take a couple more questions to wrap us up.
Okay. So I brought some of my favorite figs. I've got a Herald, that's that gemmy one, really jammy, sort of raspberry fruity flavored one. We've got one called M12. That's a male. It's a smaller green variety. It fruits real early in the spring and later in the fall. So it gets two times you can pollinate things with. And then we've got Accelerator. That's the big giant guy. Big brown fig, that's a really tasty one too. And then we have the Wally's Red. It's a super early producer, big producer of early crop and fall crop too. So both of the males are double bloomers. So you get your fall and your spring. And they grow fast, and I got cuttings of everybody, so you could either buy them for $10 for the 1 gallon, 15 for that, and the cuttings are free. So the trash bag is Wally's Red. There's a bunch of those. And here you go.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have got 5 more minutes. We'll take questions. Rose.
Well, I actually was going to say that I was recently down at Apricot Lane Farm. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's the film The Biggest Little Farm. And I talked to their orchard manager about what they did. They had a really good fig year this year, even with the BFF there. And I think it would probably take a few minutes. So maybe answer questions, and then if we have time, I can talk to you guys about what they did, because they did kind of. Okay. So they did an integrated pest management plan, and essentially what they did was, I took notes while I was talking to John Shustra. He's also an avocado grower. And let me see. So what they did is they actually did use the GF 120. They also use it for their olives there. And they took little squares of carpet, they tied them in their fig trees, and they sprayed them a few times over the course of the season. They didn't want to use it constantly because they were worried about,
Pollinators.
No, not so much about pollinators actually, but they were worried about building up any kind of resistance within the fly population by using this over and over again. They also kept their chickens underneath the fig trees to eat the figs and any of the larvae. And let me see. They removed their early crop. So what they were hoping to do was interrupt the life cycle in that early part of the season. So they took the whole early crop off of the tree and only relied on their late crop. And they found that worked really well for them also. They have a lot of wild fruit trees there, which includes wild figs. And I am guessing that they have male figs and the native wasps pollinating their figs, but they haven't looked into that at all. But I would guess that they have also had some of that success because they have all of these wild figs in their area. But those were the main strategies that they used, and they said they had a better crop than everybody else in the area that was dealing with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. Great. Any last questions? Pressing questions? Yes.
Slide you have percentages for pollinated versus unpollinated. There, are you talking the variety or the stage of the fruit? Like,
I say it again. What's your question?
Like, I think you had 50% unpollinated were infected, whereas 0.5% pollinated were infected. My question is, are you talking the stage of the fruit, or are you talking the variety of?
So it was ripe fruit that they harvested from the tree, and they found that of the fruit that was pollinated, less than 1% was impacted by BFF, and the ones that weren't pollinated were almost 60% impacted. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and if somebody eats a ripe fig which have larvae, does it affect humans or?
The good news is that it would be hard to eat it because it falls early from the tree and it looks super ugly. Like you'd look at it and you'd be like, I don't want to eat that. It doesn't ripen properly.
But it does. But you did say that it does ripe, right? So in some cases, the ripe fruits do have the larvae in it, right?
Good question. So we'll have to look closer at the study and see. I'm guessing that it was similar to what Mel was describing, where they took a point in time and they looked at all the fruits on the tree, and they said it was impacted.
One thing you mentioned was as the fruit is getting, going across the state, that might be the one reason how it's getting, moving across. But you'll only move across the ripe fruit, right? So.
Yeah, so infested fruits are falling. What is your possibility of moving the insect by moving fruit? I think for the most part, yeah, that seems like a challenge. Now, in some cases, we would find that they would pupate actually in the fruit. It's very rare, but
in the ripe fruit.
In the ripe fruit, yeah. I think that's just where you had so many going on that some fraction of the population does a little bit different thing. But we don't know how they've moved. They can fly. They're a big fly. They can fly far. So then there's plenty of wild figs around the state. So they're kind of following those. But it's okay to eat an insect. Let me tell you.
A little protein. Yes, Israel.
What kind of efforts have been put into just communicating with nurseries and garden centers who are actually distributing trees with soil that could have the hosted?
So, we had these conversations with CDFA early on, and when they said we can't make a quarantine, I said, okay, so what do we do? And they go, well, we're just going to say and underline, we strongly suggest you don't move. And, you give that to a nursery, you give that to anyone else, and they go, okay, well, is it legal to move it? And they say, yeah. And they go, okay, well, I got to make a buck, and they got to move the thing on. So it's a really difficult thing to get in front of.
Consumers, when they walk into San Lorenzo, they want the tree with fruit on it. They don't want the tree with no fruit on it. So it's almost incentivizes nurseries to ship stuff with fruit. But then if it's distributing this pest and there's no rule,
I know.
It's just that's.
So I got 1 foot in the nursery business, and so I can directly tell you I have talked to other nursery owners who ship, and they got one of their shipments found with the fruit flies in it in Sacramento. So one of those things where like, hey, we found it in Sacramento. Well, yeah, it came from here, was sent there, and it was in a panache, and they said, okay, we're stripping all of our fruit every time because they were going to say we can't sell our fruit. Okay, screw you. We're going to strip the fruit off the plant and sell the plant. And because that's what they had to do to keep selling, and now he's just going throughout the nursery stripping them all. And yeah, that's what it's coming to, where you can't do that. So
I was just going to say, it seems like that's a reasonable first step, and yet it could still be in that soil that's being transplanted with that tree.
Yeah.
So even getting a tree without fruit is not a guarantee.
And that could be one of the biggest, things that moves them around is the nursery business of just, hey, I want a fruit on this thing.
I just had one thing I wanted to get in. Given that it goes in the soil, like we're talking about here, the chicken thing, that is really interesting. That makes a lot of sense. It's been brought up also by other master gardener, rare fruit grower groups around the state, potentially covering the soil under a tree, just depending on how many trees you have. Has anybody done that in here or had experience with that?
Like with poly or something? Or?
Yeah, something like a plastic, because if they're dropping in and they can't get in the soil, they're not going to be able to survive. And that's something that, in our commercial orchards, is that something you've been doing?
No, I'm going to speak on behalf of a CRFG member who's not here. He has fig trees. He's a retired engineer in Palo Alto. And I guess
his post didn't get to the Monterey chapter or the other chapters, but he's very active in Santa Clara. So he's a retired engineer in Palo Alto, and he sent in this long post with his fig trees, and he's had really good success putting little squares of waterproof tape on the belly button of the figs.
Right.
It worked, and he's been doing research, when timing and stuff.
It's just like putting the bags over the fruit. And there was a study in Brazil where they also have this fly where they did the same thing. They got those little fruit stickers and they just did every single osteo, and it lowered infestation. So again, it's two different ways of blocking their ability to get in there.
So it worked. And actually in my orchard, we did do one tree. We did our panache tree with tape. And we did find, we still had about 25% drop with putting tape on the ostiole, but duct tape worked tremendously better than other types of tape because it was stickier. So anyway, for what that's worth, duct tape seemed to be better to block the ostiole. And with that, I'm so sorry, but we are here, and I promise, Billy, the good news is we have the dinner to be able to continue this conversation. So let's just give a round of applause and gratitude to our speakers.